There's a very big mountain that we can see right behind us over there. Mm-hmm. I used to live in the foothills of that mountain over there.
Helen Cruz has lived in Grants Pass, Oregon since she was 4 years old.
They call it Devil's Slide.
Devil's Slide?
Yeah. And it was quite the trek up there. You know, I used to walk the railroad tracks, and then I'd have to hike about a mile up it to be able to get into my camp. And then when I got a job, I had to come down off the mountain because it was getting, you know, I'm not young in age anymore. And it was getting a little bit hard to be able to trek that, so.
On and off for the past few years, she's been homeless.
Before that, you know, I had a bit of a struggle growing up. Both my parents were alcoholics. We moved a lot. You know, every time I would see Mom and Dad putting our clothes into a garbage bag and throwing them into the back of the station wagon, it was time to go because they hadn't paid the rent, you know. And it's not because Mom and Dad didn't have money or jobs. There was just no houses. So we lived in a tent.
Cruz cleans houses during the day, and up until recently, slept in her car or in a tent in one of the parks in Grants Pass.
I kept my surroundings clean. I was on top of everybody in the parks that were, you know, camping there as well. I would get up every morning and I would, like, literally go tent to tent and just make sure that everybody had their stuff organized and had it, you know, dealt with. When you live in a tent, even if I do get food stamps, you have to buy every single day because you have no way to cook. Mm-hmm. You know, I can't go and put something in my refrigerator to keep it good. And if you're living out there, you're not allowed to have an ice chest because if you do, it's considered scattering rubbish and they'll give you a ticket.
And that's just what happened. Cruz and her partner each received a series of tickets, including 2 separate $295 citations for camping in parks, followed by an exclusion order, kicking them out of Morrison Park, the park they were sleeping in at the time.
Well, they took everything I owned that was in my tent, rolled it up, broke all my tent poles and everything, just rolled everything up, drug it down the pathway, threw it in the back of their police truck, took it down to the cop shop, and told me I could come and get it there. I was overwhelmed and emotional. It still makes me mad to this day. They took everything I owned, you know, and I had important papers. I had personal pictures in there. I had, you know, just things that I can't afford to put in storage. I don't have the money to do that.
But then Cruz saw something written at the bottom of her citation.
I read the fine print at the very bottom of one of those notices, and it said you have the right to appeal. I wanted to make a difference somewhere, you know, maybe open people's eyes and hopefully, you know, see a change, make a difference somewhere.
Helen Cruz's case is one of many that have appeared before the courts as cities up and down the West Coast have passed laws trying to regulate the activities of people who don't have a home. And Grants Pass is at the center of the biggest case of all, a case that could change homelessness policy across the entire country. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments in that case, Grants Pass v. Johnson, in April. They could release their ruling as early as June. I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast about the place you call home. Today, I'm going to hand the show over to Jeremiah Hayden, a reporter from Street Roots newspaper. He's spent some time in Grants Pass and went to D.C. to cover oral arguments in the Supreme Court. He's going to tell us how this small city in Oregon came to be at the center of a Supreme Court case and what it all might mean for the country.
The issue at the heart of Helen Cruz's case is the same issue at the heart of the case in front of the Supreme Court. To what degree can cities enforce regulations on where and when people can sleep outside, especially if they don't have alternate shelter space available? Or put another way, can people be punished for being homeless even if they don't have anywhere else to go? In the small city of Grants Pass, there's only one shelter. Gospel Rescue Mission is a high barrier shelter. That means residents are required to abstain from using substances, attend daily Christian services, and abide by a host of other rules as a condition of their stay. The mission requires residents to turn over all medications and stay nicotine-free. It does not permit socializing between members of the opposite sex except at approved events. And the mission acknowledges gender and sexuality in what they refer to as biblical terms, meaning residents must, quote, dress and behave according to their birth gender. Brian Boteller is the mission's executive director.
The Gospel Rescue Mission is one kind of solution for one kind of homeless person. It's not the solution for all homeless people.
Grants Pass v. Johnson is in front of the Supreme Court right now. But originally the case was Grants Pass v. Blake in 2018. Deborah Blake lived in the parks of Grants Pass, and Boteller said she wasn't able to stay at the mission.
I don't know that she was ever diagnosed. She struggles with mental illness. She doesn't do well in a group living situation, right? Okay, in a dormitory environment. She had been in the mission before, and she wouldn't do well. She'd become very disruptive and everything.
On March 28, 2013, the Grants Pass City Council held a community roundtable to, quote, identify solutions to current vagrancy problems. In its own words, the purpose was to focus on developing strategies to modify behavior and connect people to services. At that meeting, Lily Morgan, the council president, stated, quote, the point is to make it uncomfortable enough for them and our city that they will want to move on down the road. City code explicitly bars anyone from sleeping in public spaces, including parks, sidewalks, and in cars, or using sleeping materials, like a blanket, for the purpose of maintaining a temporary place to live, under threat of criminal and civil penalty. In city code, parks are defined as city halls, community centers, police and fire stations, parking lots, traffic islands, or urban beautification areas owned or maintained by the city, basically everywhere. Boteller said for people like Deborah Blake, the city didn't have much choice.
Deborah Blake probably wouldn't have had options. She was so disruptive that somebody that would normally say, you can come stay at my house, would find that she'd be prone to, be disruptive. The cops say, well, look, I don't know where you're going to go, but you can't stay here. We've got to enforce the rules and everything, and you can't stay here. And so, okay. So she does anyways. Okay. Now what are they going to do? Well, they're going to give her a trespassing. Then once she's guilty of trespassing, then the fines start stacking up, right? Okay, then it's either jail or fines.
The Oregon Law Center filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of Deborah Blake. She died in 2021, and Gloria Johnson and John Logan stepped in as class representatives as the case made its way through the appeals process. That's how Grants Pass v. Johnson ended up at the Supreme Court. This whole case rests on another case decided in 2018, just 6 weeks before Blake filed her lawsuit. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit ruled that Boise, Idaho had violated the constitutional rights of homeless people by imposing criminal penalties for sleeping and camping outdoors, even though the city didn't have enough shelter beds. That case is called Martin v. Boise, and it upended the way cities felt they could deal with people who are homeless. Can a city regulate where people sleep if they don't have enough shelter beds for everyone? How do you even count if there are enough beds for everyone? And does it matter if the shelter beds are in a place that has a lot of restrictions? If you make certain areas where people can sleep outside, can you force people to go there?
Every step of this process, we've been advised by city attorneys, and they know Martin v. Boise inside and out, and they believe that what we are doing comports with Martin v. Boise.
That's Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler when he was asked about a street camping ban passed by City Council in 2022. Many cities are hoping that the Supreme Court ruling in Grants Pass v. Johnson will change or clarify Martin v. Boise. A friend of the court, or amicus brief, submitted by the city and county of San Francisco said that Martin v. Boise has hamstrung its efforts. It reads, by restricting San Francisco's ability to enforce those laws, judicial intervention has thwarted both the city's ability to provide services to persons experiencing homelessness and its ability to protect the health, safety, and welfare needs of its residents as a whole. Even the Gospel Rescue Mission filed a brief in support of Grants Pass, saying that without penalties, fewer people have used the mission's services.
What's unique about the amicus briefs in support of the city of Grants Pass is that they had bipartisan support. So there were sort of politically oriented entities that could be construed as both conservative and as progressive in favor of the Grants Pass appeal.
That's Sarah Rankin. She's a professor at Seattle University School of Law and the director of the Homeless Rights Advocacy Project. One thing that was clear from the Supreme Court's oral arguments on this case in April, laws addressing homelessness are complicated.
That is a difficult policy question. This is a complicated policy question.
You've said several times that it's a difficult policy question, a complicated policy question. I think everyone would agree with that.
I'm saying that's a policy question that is quite difficult.
You're right. It's a very, very difficult policy question.
Much of the conversation between the justices and the lawyers on each side was around the issue of status. Is this law in Grants Pass punishing people for their conduct or for the status of being homeless? Here's an exchange between Justice Sotomayor and the lawyer representing the city of Grants Pass, Theane Evangelos.
It's only stopping you from sleeping in public if you, for the purpose of maintaining a temporary place to live. And the police officers testified that means that if a stargazer wants to take a blanket or a sleeping bag out at night to watch the stars and falls asleep, you don't arrest them. You don't arrest babies who have blankets over them. You don't arrest people who are sleeping on the beach, as I tend to do if I've been there a while. You only arrest people who don't have a second home. Is that correct?
Well,
who don't have a home.
So, no, these laws are generally applicable. They apply to everyone.
That's what you want to say. Give me one example, because your police officers couldn't. And they explicitly said, if someone has a home, and is out there and happens to fall asleep, they won't be arrested. Fall asleep with something on them.
Well, Joint Appendix, page 98, is one example of a citation issued to a person with a home address. But more importantly, I think what we're getting at here is that these laws regulate conduct of everyone. There's nothing in the law that criminalizes homelessness.
That's what you say, but if I look at the record and see differently.
The justices spent a lot of time asking about status versus conduct. They were also trying to understand how you define status. Can it be something that is voluntary? Here's another exchange between Justice Alito and Evangelos.
Do you think that someone who is a drug addict is absolutely incapable that all people who are drug addicts are absolutely incapable of refraining from using drugs?
I think that for some that may be true, and for some perhaps they can abstain, but that's a question of free will and agency that's true of every law and what conduct we choose to regulate.
All right, then compare that with a person who absolutely has no place to sleep in a particular jurisdiction. Does that person have any alternative other than sleeping outside?
So I think we'd have to ask all of the questions I mentioned earlier about what alternatives they might have had yesterday.
They have none. They have absolutely none. There's not a single place where they can sleep.
If that's true, then that may be the case. And in that case, at least in Oregon, they would have a defense of necessity.
So the point is that the connection between drug addiction and drug usage is more tenuous than the connection between absolute homelessness and sleeping outside.
That defense of necessity, that's something that the Oregon legislature codified when they amended a state statute in 2021 in response to the Martin v. Boise decision. It's a relatively short, new statute, and it says this: any city or county law that regulates the acts of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outdoors on public property that is open to the public must be objectively reasonable as to time, place, and manner with regards to persons experiencing homelessness. Rankin says she thinks the Supreme Court justices were looking for a way to avoid rendering a decision.
They were leaning towards something called constitutional avoidance. They want to avoid ruling where it's not necessary, and they'd like to see if there's a way to avoid rendering a decision in this case. And if the Oregon's necessity defense could apply, then they can stand back and say, our review was improvidently granted, and, we declined to render a decision here. And a number of justices were signaling their interest in taking that approach.
But she thinks the strict nature of Grants Pass's ordinance makes it an outlier.
The difference in Grants Pass is that they had a citywide prohibition. They criminalized sleeping across the city. What's at issue in Johnson is saying there is 0 locations where someone, even if they lack a reasonable alternative, there are 0 locations right now in Grants Pass where it's legal for someone to sleep outside.
Right now, those strict ordinances are not being enforced in Grants Pass. The city has been under an injunction since 2020, while the case made its way through the court system. Instead, there are fines. Currently, people living in Grants Pass city parks are required to move every 72 hours. Police officers come to parks every Monday and Thursday, hand out 72-hour eviction notices, and give $295 citations for something called scattering rubbish. Left unpaid, fines for violating camping ordinances increased to $537.60. Helen Cruz received these fines, in addition to the park exclusion order, the one that she appealed.
And what they would do is they would come around every 3 days, and they would give you a citation. You'd have to drop it, move your camp. My tickets were for scattering rubbish, illegal camping in the park. They would ticket me when I wasn't even there. They would just write it out.
Vigilante groups started harassing homeless residents, calling themselves park watch groups. According to some homeless residents I spoke to, they show up at the parks, slash tents, empty shampoo bottles, and scatter belongings. A nonprofit organization called MINT, or Mobile Integrative Navigation Team, offered to help park residents move their tents every Saturday. Cassie Leach is the CEO and co-founder of MINT. When the Supreme Court held oral arguments in April, she was listening.
I woke up and I listened, obviously, to the Supreme Court case. And while I was listening to it, one of the ladies I helped, she's 62, blind in one eye, but she has a cat named Sylvester, and she has to switch parks each week. But anyways, she was at Fruitdale Park and had to move to Tussing on Saturday, and Sylvester wasn't there and he was missing. So Monday morning, I took her to Fruitdale to look for Sylvester, listened on my phone while I was doing that, then went back. When it was over, I went to Tussing Park.
MINT has been working to retrofit a building in downtown Grants Pass, turning it into an emergency shelter and navigation center. I first met Cassie Leach at that building in February and rode along with her that afternoon to meet with local residents living in the parks.
Our goal of that building is really just to meet community need and create a daytime space that's psychologically safe, where people can come and access resources and, connect with their case manager, or if they're on the list for substance use, like it's a safe place for them to go before they go to treatment.
In April, the Grants Pass City Council unanimously approved a special use permit for MINT's new navigation center and emergency shelter. Leach said she's starting to see a change in the city.
Well, in Grants Pass, I can't speak for the rest of the nation, but there's a weird unification happening, and it's beautiful. The city council unanimously approved our property, which included shelter, right? That's never happened in Grants Pass. And one of the leaders of Park Watch is installing new floors for us for free. And that to me is just beautiful, because we are fundamentally disagree on how to treat the unhoused, but we can come together on the 2 points of, we both want them out of the park and we both want a place for them to go that's safe.
Leach got a call recently from the police chief who wanted to talk about how to keep Little League kids safe at the park where they play.
Little leaguers shouldn't have to scum the park, their field for needles. They shouldn't, and we can all agree on that. But, it becomes a different public safety concern, when we have 100 kids in Morrison Park and dozens of campers, and I understand and appreciate that. But the fact that he wants to reach out to me, and obviously I'm going to advocate for the folks, is great.
Meanwhile, Leach estimates there are over 1,000 people who are homeless in Grants Pass right now.
More and more new people I'm helping, and one guy we just got into treatment, him and his mom were new out here. There's a family of 6 that showed up a week and a half ago. And, it's just, we're just starting, and it's just devastating. And we have not began to even bend the curve on building. We need to build more affordable housing.
The Supreme Court is expected to render a judgment as early as June. Helen Cruz isn't so sure it will change much in Grants Pass.
Now, as far as when it comes down to what the Supreme Court does, I see if it rules in our favor of the homeless, wonderful. But I still don't see much that's going to be done. I really don't.
But she remains hopeful.
I had a hard upbringing, but you know what? I'm pretty resilient and resourceful. And by the grace of God, I'm still here today, And my will and determination to see what's right and wrong is brought me a long way.
That was Jeremiah Hayden, a reporter for Street Roots newspaper. You can read more of his reporting on this at opb.org. And join us next week to hear about Portland's largest city-run outdoor homeless shelter, which was put forward by Mayor Wheeler specifically to get around some of the issues raised in Martin v. Boise. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. If you're here listening right now, you are a part of our brand new podcast family. Help us grow by leaving a review on your favorite podcast app. Follow us there, and hey, tell your friends. Stephen Cray engineered this episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada, Julie Sabatier, and Sage Van Wing. Jeremiah Hayden and Dave Miller conducted the interviews you heard. The music in this episode comes from Audio Network. And hey, if you ever have a question for us, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.